Well, I'm pretty excited. I started working ahead this week, and I realized we've got just 2 weeks left in Matthew 25, this week and next, and after that we get into basically the crucifixion account starts in Matthew 26. And I'm really excited about that. There's a lot, it's a real shift when you get to Matthew 26 from all this teaching that Jesus has been doing in 23, 24, and 25 to narrative. Back to the story of what's happening to Jesus, what's going on with Jesus and his crucifixion. So I'm really excited about that. But before we get to that, we still have 2 more sermons on Matthew 25. And I want to remind you this morning that in this section of 24 and 25, this is really, Jesus is teaching us how we're supposed to behave in light of his coming. Okay, and his coming is broad. I've talked about that. It's primarily about the coming to Jerusalem and destruction, but it's also about his second coming. You could also say it's about his death, your death as well when we die. So the question is, will we be prepared? If you're going to ask, how can you sum up Matthew 24 and 25? The question is, are you prepared? Are you ready? Are you a Boy Scout? You know, the Boy Scouts motto is be prepared. Okay, are you ready and are you prepared for Jesus to return or for Jesus to come in judgment upon our country? Okay, so this is a wonderful reminder to us. A lot of men, let's take a step back, a lot of men who approach death or are close to dying talk about how death has a way of clarifying things for you. When you know you're going to die, or when you're getting ready to go into battle and you know you could die from a bullet wound or from stepping on a mine, it clarifies things for you. Those things which are important become first in your mind. Those things which you thought were so important but really aren't kind of seep to the back, go to the back. Okay, and that's the case what Jesus is trying to do here. He's trying to help us understand what are the priorities. What is most important for us as we go throughout life, and Jesus is doing this by means of a couple of parables. Okay, so this morning we come to Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. And it's a story of the talents, very common, popular story. All right, let me just walk you through what goes on here. Jesus begins with the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country. He calls his servants and delivers his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1. Now, a talent was the largest measurement of weight in the ancient world. Okay? Most scholars believe it was the equivalent of 6,000 denarii. 1 talent, 6,000 denarii, and a denarius was 1 day's wages. Okay? So you're talking about 6,000 days' wages per talent. Okay? All you mathematicians out there can work that out. But the point is, a talent's not some small sum of money. It's a very large sum of money. And we've seen the talents once before with the unforgiving servant. Remember that? The unforgiving servant who was forgiven 10,000 talents, but he would not forgive his fellow servant a much, much smaller amount. Okay? So the master here is dispensing large sums of money. Okay? And the other important point here is a talent for us means some sort of skill you have, okay? Maybe you can do magic tricks, or maybe you can bend your elbows like those people who are double jointed. I don't know. Maybe you have different talents, okay, like that. Well, that's not at all what this is talking about. This is talking about a sum of money. It's talking about capital, if you will. And that's what this master is giving to his servant. Here is some capital. Here is some investment money. Go invest it wisely, all right? And hence the name of the sermon today is, or the sermon title is, Are You Turning a Profit? That's the question this morning. Are you turning a profit? Okay? So, he hands this out, and they receive the talents, and the man with the 5 talents goes and trades them and doubles his capital. He doubles the investment. That's pretty sweet, okay? You start out with 5 talents, you end up with 10 talents. Okay? You start out with 30,000 denarii, or the equivalent of 30,000 denarii, and you end up with 60. So that's pretty sweet. And likewise, the guy who got 2, he went and did the same thing. Now, Jesus doesn't tell us what they did. Okay, this isn't a lesson on business practices. We don't know what they did to double their income. Some of you might be saying, well, I wish I knew what they did to double their investment. Most of us see our investment being halved, not doubled today. But Jesus doesn't tell us what they did. The point is, they went out, they put the money to work, and it gained back for the master. Okay? But the guy with the 1 talent, he went and put his money in the ground. And Jesus is going to tell us why he did this, okay? It wasn't a good choice. We know this from the story, and Jesus is going to tell us why he did that in a little bit later. Okay, so after a long time, so there's a long period of time. We don't know how long. Again, every parable here has this long period of time. We don't know how long it was, but obviously it was a pretty lengthy period of time. And the Lord of the servants came and settled accounts. So the man who received 5, he brings the 5 to the master and says, Lord, you gave me these 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. Now notice that. That's an interesting little phrase. You were faithful over a few things. 5 talents was the equivalent of 30,000 days' wages. Okay? But for the master, Jesus, that is just a few things, which I thought was interesting. It kind of tells us a little bit about who Jesus is and how much he has at his disposal. He says, because you're faithful over a few, I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord, or into the joy of your master. That's a wonderful little phrase we'll come back to in a bit. He also, the 2 talents, the guy with the 2 talents comes. He says, look, you gave me 2 talents, and I've gotten 2 more. So I started with 2, and now I have 4. His Lord said, same exact thing. Notice that. The exact same thing. All right, even though there's less talents involved, the exact same word, a warm word of commendation to the one who had 2 talents. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he had received the 1 talent, came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. Now it's interesting, the 2 contrasts between the man with the 5 and the man with the 2 and the man with the 1, especially in how they viewed the master. Okay? Notice the man with the 5 and the man with the 2 went immediately off to work, got things done, and when the master showed up, they came, and they said, here it is, and they were excited. The third guy is afraid of the master. For him, the master is fearful. He is a hard man. He is a cruel man. It's interesting, the word hard there is skleros. And I wrote the word down. Hold up here. But we have an English word that it does. See if I can dig this out.
Sclerosis.
Yeah, arteriosclerosis. There you go. Thank you. The hardening of the arteries. So the idea is that the master sees Jesus as or the servant sees Jesus as a hard man. A hard man. Now this is not the case. This is not the case. But because the master did what he did, the Lord answers him as if it is true. He said, but his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Okay? In other words, if I am this type of man, why are you sitting here doing nothing? Okay? If I am this type of man, why do you choose to just sit on your bottom and not go to work? In fact, Jesus says here, I'm not asking a lot. All I'm asking you to do is go down to the bank and put it in the savings account and give me some interest. I'm not asking you to double it like the guy with the 5 or the guy with the 2. Okay? So Jesus here is not really being hard on the guy. He's saying all you do is take my money, go down to the bank, deposit it. Hey, in 5 years or whenever I came back, I would have interest. And I would have been happy. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And cast the unprofitable servant. And the word there means worthless or useless. The unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay? So in this parable, we see some of the same things that we've seen all throughout Jesus' teaching. There are 2 groups of people. Okay? There are those who get in, well done, good and faithful servant, and there are those who are cast out. Okay? There were those who belong to the master's household, but really do not love the master and do not obey the master and are not concerned about the master. So there's this group of people, in this case 3 servants, and they all belong to the household, but only 2 of them are true faithful servants. One of them is not. Okay? Notice here also the inevitability of verse 30. Seems like every parable throughout this section ends with some sort of disaster befalling the person. They're left outside. The 5 foolish virgins were left outside of the wedding feast. And here the one unprofitable servant was cast into outer darkness. Okay, so this is clearly a end of the world type scenario or final judgment type scenario. Okay, all right. So what's the point of this? Okay, what's the point? I'm trying to decide whether I should go with the wicked servant first or the faithful servant first. Well, I've chosen to go with the faithful servant first. Okay, so we have two different types of servants here. We have the faithful and the wicked, or the unprofitable servant. Let's talk about the faithful servant first. And the main theme here is the faithful servant profits the kingdom. Okay, that is the main point. The faithful servant profits the kingdom. The faithful servant gets a return on the investment that Jesus has given to them. The faithful servant gets a return on the investment. Now let me say, before I get into the points here, what is a talent here? How should we view these talents? All right? And I thought Charles Spurgeon had the best definition of the talent. Okay? He said a talent is anything and everything that Jesus has given to us here to use as his stewards. Okay? Anything and everything that Jesus has given to us here to use as his stewards. So I think that's helpful. Basically, everything you own, from your gifts and your abilities, from your possessions, your money, your time, your energy, everything, your children, everything that God, or Jesus in this case, has given to you to be a faithful steward of, that is a talent. Okay, so don't think of talents real narrowly as just your abilities. All right, that's part of it. But it's way bigger than that. I thought Spurgeon's illustration was, or definition was a good one. Okay, so the faithful servant profits the kingdom by using these talents that God has given, Jesus has given to him, to return investment. To return the investment. All right, and let's see how he does this. What does the faithful servant do? All right, let me give you a couple of things here. First, if we're going to be faithful servants, and that's what we want to be, if we're going to be faithful servants, we have to understand that we are stewards, not masters. Okay? A faithful servant understands that he is a steward and not a master. Now, a steward, I've said this before, but let me say it again. A steward is someone who is given something for a period of time by the master so he can keep it and usually make it profit and grow. Okay? So back in the ancient times, a lot of men had stewards. So when they would travel across the country or go someplace, that steward was responsible for the house. He was responsible for the investment. He was responsible for the slaves. He was kind of like a house manager, if you will, a steward. Okay? A faithful servant understands that he is a steward and not a master. We are not masters. There's nothing in this life that you are the master of. Okay? It all belongs to Jesus. Whatever he's given to you, it all belongs to him. Okay? It might be your money, it might be your time, it might be your children, it might be your house, it might be your job, it might be your talents and your abilities, it might be any of that, but all of it is given to you as a steward, not a master. Okay? And that means you are accountable to Jesus for what you do with the stuff. You're accountable to Jesus. And this is what the faithful stewards understood, or the faithful servants. The faithful servants understood the master's coming back. He's going to want us to give a good account. Let's go make something happen. Okay? The faithful servant understands that he is a steward and not a master. And often the decisions we make with our talents, with our opportunities, with our stuff, the decisions we make do not reflect the mindset of a steward, but they reflect the mindset of a master. They reflect the mindset of someone who views themselves as ruling over their time instead of being accountable for their time. Okay? So the first thing a faithful steward understands is that he is a steward, not a master. And that means that he is accountable to Jesus for what he does with his stuff. Okay? And this is really the beginning. If you don't believe you're accountable, then you're going to do whatever you want to with it. My money's my own. I do what I want to with it. My house is my own. I do what I want to with it. My time is my own. I do what I want to with it. But if you see Jesus as the one you're accountable to, then you will make sure you use that wisely. Second, the faithful servant takes advantage of all opportunities Jesus gives to him. And I want to spend some time here. The faithful servant takes advantages of all opportunities that Jesus gives to him. I use opportunities instead of talents, but same idea. Okay? First here, Jesus decides what opportunities are given. Okay, he gives all of us different things. And it comes from Jesus. Notice here in the parable, the master, who's obviously Jesus, gives to each according to what he thinks they're fit to have. Okay? So this guy got 5, and this guy got 2, and this guy got 1, and Jesus does it this way. This guy works and gets $125,000 a year, and this guy works and gets $25,000 a year. This guy has 8, 9 children, this guy has 3 children. This guy has lots of extra time, this guy has no extra time. Jesus gives to us exactly what he thinks we need. There is nothing in your life right now, no opportunity, no ability, no talent, no possession, nothing in your life that is not there because Jesus has said, I want you to have that. Okay? I want you to have that. Right? And that means that we should not sit here and evaluate our life based on our neighbor's life. Okay, and this is an important point. We like to look at what opportunities, what is my neighbor doing with their talents? Is my neighbor spending their time wisely? Is my neighbor using their money wisely? Well, Jesus gives to each person different opportunities, okay, as he sees fit. All right? So that's an important point. That comes back to the steward and master relationship. We are not masters, we are stewards, and we're all stewards of Christ, and therefore he gives to us what we want. And we all have different opportunities. All of us do. None of us are in the exact same spot. Jesus doesn't give all of us the exact same thing, okay? And we're supposed to take advantage of all those opportunities, okay? I want to bring one more point about the opportunities. Throughout our life, those opportunities will vary, okay? Will vary. So some of you right now have a lot of time. God has given you a lot of time for whatever reason, okay? Some of us have very little time. Our time is squished, okay? We get an hour per day to think straight, we're pretty happy, okay? Some of you have a lot of time. Some of you have a lot of money right now. Some of you will have less money. Some of you have a lot of money later, you don't have much now. My point is, all throughout life, Jesus shifts those opportunities. Okay? And it's our responsibility to take advantage of all of those opportunities that Jesus gives to us. Okay? Every single one. Okay? Let me add one other point to this, okay? There are a lot of different ways to be profitable with the opportunities that Jesus gives to you. Okay? There's not one single way to invest your money wisely. There's not one single way to spend your time wisely. Okay? And that's why I think Jesus in this parable doesn't give specifics. He doesn't tell us what they did to gain the money back. His point is they were using it and they were getting a profit back. So the question isn't like, is that person spending their time exactly as I would spend my time? The question is, am I being faithful with the time that Jesus has given to me? Okay? And there's a lot of different ways to be profitable, whether you're talking about your money, your time, your children, your energy, whatever it might be. There's a lot of different ways to be profitable. So the question is, are you being profitable? Okay? The specifics are important, but not as important as the general thing. Are you gaining for the kingdom? Are you using your time wisely for the kingdom? Are you using your energy wisely for the kingdom? Even your rest, and we all need rest, but do you rest so you can be rejuvenated to do more? Or is your rest simply a way of being lazy? Okay? And there's a big difference between the two. We rest in the kingdom so we might be more profitable when we're done resting than we were before. The rest is a way of rejuvenating ourselves, a way of getting renewed and restored back to full strength. If that's what your rest is doing for you, then that's good. But if your rest is just a way of being lazy, then that's not profitable. That's not profitable. Okay, and we talk about our money. We can talk about our time. Talk about our energy. A lot of you are young here. You have a lot of physical energy. That energy will not last forever and ever and ever. Are you using that energy well? Are you squandering it on worthless endeavors? Okay. What about our children? Those of us who have children, we are stewards of our children. We're not masters of our children. We are stewards of our children, and we will give an account to Jesus for how we turn a profit, in a sense, with our children. Okay? Are we helping them grow in the Lord? Are they going to be more mature when they get to 36 than I am at 36? Okay? Are they going to be more mature than I am? Okay? And we could go into all sorts of areas. The question here, are you taking advantage of all the opportunities that Jesus gives to you? Every day, day in and day out, taking advantage of those opportunities. Okay, so the second thing the faithful servant does is he takes advantage of the opportunities. He doesn't waste time, doesn't squander it. He goes and turns a profit. Okay? Third, the faithful servant does not fear the master. And this is a great point, I think. And one of the big differences between the unfaithful servant, the third guy, and the first two guys. You tell the first two guys, they were not afraid of the master. They were not afraid of making a bad investment. They went off and they did something. Okay? They did something. Now this third guy, the word used in verse 26, but his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy or slothful servant. The word lazy there is not your typical word for lazy. It means to hesitate because of fear. It means to hesitate because of fear. In other words, the slothful servant was afraid of making the wrong decision. Well, the first two guys were like, you know what, I'm just going to do something. I'm going to go do something for Christ. I'm going to make it happen for my master. And we don't know, again, we don't know exactly how it worked. Did they gain some and lose some? How did it all go? I don't know. Okay? But the point is, they were not afraid. I think a lot of times for us as Christians, we look at Jesus as a harsh and cruel master instead of a gentle and kind master. If you are seeking to be profitable in the kingdom, Jesus is not going to come along with a club and bash you upside the head. Okay? That's not what Jesus is going to do. If you're seeking to be profitable, if you're seeking to use your time wisely, use your money wisely, use your possessions wisely, if you're seeking to do your job well at your vocation, men, if you're seeking to do that well, then Jesus is going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. It will never be perfect, but he will say, well done. Okay? So the faithful servant does not fear the master. I want to read one of the verses on this, John 15:15. Great verse on this. Jesus is talking to the disciples, probably very close to the time he's talking to them here in our Matthew passage. And this is what he says. He says, you are my friends if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I've heard from my Father, I've made known to you. Okay? There's a lot of other illustrations like this, but the point is Jesus is our friend. He is our brother. He is the faithful shepherd. He is not a cruel, unkind master. We don't need to be afraid. Here's my point. We don't need to be afraid of making the wrong investment. We need to move forward, trusting, seeking to obey as best we can, and trusting that Jesus is going to help us turn the profit. Okay, so third point, the faithful servant does not fear the master. Fourth, the faithful servant will be rewarded by Christ. Okay, we see this in 21 and down in 23. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done, good and faithful servant. I do not think any of us, and I hope this is true, all of us want this particular phrase said to us, do we not? Well done. Well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. You did a good job. And that word well done is very rare. It's not used very much. And so here has special emphasis, okay? The man or woman who is faithful with what God has given to them is going to be rewarded by Jesus. And notice here, it's not a reward based on the opportunities you are given, not the amount of opportunities. Okay, notice the guy with 5 got the exact same reward. The guy with 2 got the exact same reward as the guy with 5. Okay, so it's not the number of opportunities you have. That's not the key thing. The question is what you do with the opportunities you are given by Jesus. Okay, so if you make $25,000 a year and another guy in the church makes $125,000, that doesn't mean if you're faithful with your 25, you're not going to hear well done. Okay, the question is be faithful with what Jesus has given to you. So the faithful servant is going to be rewarded by Christ. And this reminded me of the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Remember that, where he went out at the morning and noon, or in the morning at 9 and noon and all the way through the day. And he kept bringing in different workers. This is Matthew chapter 20. He kept bringing in different workers. At the end, they all get paid the same thing. They all get paid the exact same thing. And the point is, if you are faithful with what Jesus has given to you, you will be rewarded by Jesus. That's the point. Fifth, the faithful servant will be given more responsibility. Verse 28. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. Give it to him who has 10. Now, who has 10 talents? Well, the guy with 5. Notice back up there in that verse, the man with 5 talents gives his talents to Jesus, gives them all back to Jesus. Okay? But it appears in verse 28 that Jesus has given the 10 talents back to him and said, okay, now go and invest those 10 talents. Okay? If you are faithful with what Jesus gives to you, he will give you more. Okay? Now, this isn't like a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of scenario. Okay? I'm not saying like if you're faithful with your 25,000, Jesus is going to give you 50,000. Okay? Or if you're faithful with this time, Jesus is all of a sudden going to add another couple hours to your debt. Okay? It's It's not how it works. But the point is that if you are faithful with what Jesus has given to you, he will give you more responsibility. Okay? And so, if you feel like Christ is not giving you more responsibility, maybe the question you need to ask is, am I being faithful with the responsibility that Jesus has given to me? Okay? Am I being faithful with what Jesus has given to me? And if the answer to that is no, then that's why he hasn't given you more. That's why he hasn't provided you with a better job. That's why he hasn't provided you with more income. That's why he hasn't provided you with whatever it might be. Okay? Are you being faithful with what he has given? And if the answer to that is yes, then guess what? He's going to give you more. Okay? Work in the kingdom, faithful work in the kingdom means Jesus is going to give you more work in the kingdom. Okay? And that's what Jesus does. Okay? So a faithful servant is the one who, the faithful servant will be given more responsibility as Jesus sees that he's faithful with what he has been given. So the point here is, and this is where I want to kind of sum this up about the faithful servant. The point here is the faithful servant has a kingdom orientation. That's the phrase I came up with. A kingdom orientation. Okay? Everything he does, and we're not talking about spectacular things. We're not saying he goes out and does all this amazing stuff. But we're saying day in and day out, his life revolves around Jesus as his master, and his life revolves around the kingdom as his place of service. Okay? He has a kingdom orientation, an eye to the master. Okay? That is what he thinks, whether he's talking about his money, or whether he's talking about his possessions, whether he's talking about how he spends his time, whether you're talking about how hard he works at his job, whether you're talking about how faithful the wives there are within the four walls of their home, whether you're talking about the children in their schoolwork, whatever it is, the faithful servant has a kingdom orientation. He does it all with an eye to Jesus. He does it all with an eye to the master. That doesn't mean he doesn't make mistakes. We know this from Matthew and from other places. We sin. We make mistakes. We make bad investments. Those sort of things happen from time to time. That's fine. Jesus is not saying that that's not going to happen. He's not saying that. But he is saying is the faithful master is someone who strives to do everything in light of the kingdom. And this doesn't mean they're super spiritual, by the way. Okay? That doesn't mean that when I say do everything for the kingdom, I don't mean that they try to bring Jesus into every conversation. Okay, I don't mean that. I mean they're faithful with the opportunities that Jesus has given to them. And that's really the emphasis in this passage. Are you faithful with the opportunities that Jesus has given to you? Okay? Are you faithful with them? That's the question. Okay? All right, so now let's go to the wicked servant. I don't have much with this guy, but I want to bring you a couple of points here. I don't know whether I should end the sermon on a positive note or negative note. I had a bad day when I was preparing the sermon, so I thought I would end on a negative note. I think everybody likes the sermon to end negatively, right? Isn't that true? Don't we all like it? I'm kidding. I don't know. But here's the point. What are some characteristics of this wicked servant? Okay? And one of the main points Jesus makes is he's just lazy. He is lazy and slothful. Jesus is not saying, hey, listen, I want you to go out and work in the hot sun and do all this. He says, just walk down to the bank, put it in the bank, and get me a return on my investment. That's all I'm asking, okay? So Jesus isn't driving like a hard bargain here. He's not whipping him. He's saying, hey, it's pretty easy. The servant was lazy. The servant was lazy. The servant was slothful. Okay? And I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, I want more to say. Secondly, the wicked servant did not think the master was worth the effort. Okay? The wicked servant did not believe the master and the kingdom was worth the effort. It's not worth it. If we believe something is worth it, we will put out the effort necessary to make it happen. If you really want to see something happen, you work hard to make sure it happens. Well, this guy didn't think it was important enough. He didn't care about the master. He didn't care about the kingdom. He just cared about himself. Okay? Third, he makes excuses for not advancing the kingdom. He makes excuses. Well, master, I knew you were a hard guy. I knew you were really hard. You're rough. I knew you reaped where you did not sow, and you did this where you did not scatter seed, and I just knew you were hard. I knew you were rough. Excuses, excuses, excuses. Okay, that's what those are. The other two guys obviously didn't have that same perspective. Okay, and they all work for the exact same master. Okay, so he makes excuses for not advancing the kingdom. Make excuses. And fourth, he is useless. Notice that phrase in verse 30. Just as we all want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, I think none of us want to hear this particular phrase, cast the useless servant into the outer darkness, unprofitable, worthless, of no value. Okay? This man was of no value to the kingdom. He did not build it. He did not turn a profit. He did not take advantage of the opportunities given to him. He squandered and he squandered and he squandered. Okay? And I think for myself, it's been real interesting the last year or so of pastoral ministry. I realized how little I actually work sometimes. Okay? And I think we all do this as we go through our jobs or whatever. All of a sudden we come to, you know what, I can get so much more done. You know, and not just in my work, but at home, things like that. This man was useless. He had nothing to show for it. He had nothing to give to the master. And the master gave him 6,000 denarii, basically 20 years worth of work or money. And he did absolutely nothing worth it. He was useless. Okay. Final thing. Realize that this man was kept out of the kingdom not because he committed adultery, not because he committed murder, not because he looked at porn, not because of this or that. He was kept out of the kingdom because he was useless. Okay, and we're going to see this show up next week as well. It was not what he did that was the problem. It was what he didn't do that was the problem. It was his failure to take advantage of the opportunities that Jesus had given to him. And often in Christian circles, we have these great sins, and they're big sins, adultery or whatever we want to throw in that category. And those sins are grievous, and Revelation says they'll be kept out of the kingdom. Okay, not inherit the kingdom. But we don't often think about how our failure to be profitable for the kingdom could keep us out in the end. Okay? And these are strong words by Jesus, and I don't want to take the edge off of this. Okay, we know, well, Jesus forgives, and he does love, he does forgive, he does those things. But don't miss the point of the parable. This man very simply sat on his hands, and because of that, he was excluded from the kingdom of heaven. This man was lazy. He was excluded from the kingdom of heaven. Okay? Right. So the question I want us to ask ourselves at the end of this sermon is, are we taking advantage of the opportunities that Jesus has put in front of us? Are we turning a profit with what Jesus gives to us? Okay? Are you taking your time, your energy, your resources, your jobs, your spouses, your children, your friends? Are you turning a profit? Are you building the kingdom through these talents that Jesus has given to you? And is that what you're doing with it? Or are you sitting on your hands, and are you going to find one day that you're going to be held accountable, and Jesus is going to come and say, okay, well, show me what you got. And you say, well, Jesus, I really wanted to. I had this big plan, and I was going to do this, and, this came up, and that came up. I just didn't get to it. I just didn't get to it, Jesus. And what's he going to say? Well, he's going to say, wicked and slothful servant. That's what he's going to say to us. Okay? Now, the good news is he does give us strength and grace to do this. And again, let me remind you, he's not a hard master. He's not asking you to go out and change the world. He's just asking you to be faithful day in and day out with what he's given to you. And if we do that, you will hear the words, we will hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. So let's strive for that instead of being cast out as the useless servant in outer darkness. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, in many ways these parables are hard words. None of us want to believe that we are lazy. None of us want to believe that we are slothful. Yet many times we let opportunities that you've given to us slip by. The day-to-day things, our money, our possessions, our time, our children, our opportunities at work, our opportunities at home, all of these tend to slide by the wayside, and we don't turn a profit with them. I ask that you would give us wisdom and grace to know how to do that. Most of all, Lord, give us a love for you and a love for your kingdom, that like the first man and the second man, we go out immediately and we try to take what you've given to us and use it for your glory and use it for the good of those around us. Give us understanding as to how best to do this. We thank you that Jesus is a gentle master, that he said, come to him, all who are weary and heavy laden, he will give us rest. We thank you that he is a gentle master. Help us not to fear him, but instead help us to go out with courage and grace, knowing that if we strive to be profitable, he will help us. We pray this in Jesus' strong name. Amen. Amen. Let's pray for missions and evangelism. Lord, you are high.